All right. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Inside Writing. This show is presented by Gotham Writers, offering writing classes of all types and sizes. You can visit us at gothamwriters.com. We're starting season 4 today. Exciting time. So as with every season, this season will have a specific focus, and we'll be focusing on the career creative. So individuals who are actively working in the creative industries. We'll be talking to TV and movie writers, producers, podcasters, and more. And they're all going to be one-on-one. So we're digging into how they got to where they are. Before we get started, a couple of announcements. Firstly, the Gotham Writers Conference is open for registration. If you want to peek behind the publishing curtain, this is the place to be. And there's also going to be pitching roundtables and all kinds of good stuff. So you can check that out on the Gotham website. It's going to be on Zoom from October 15th through the 17th. And again, you can see that on the Gotham Writers website. Secondly, if this is your first time joining us, you can get caught up on all of our previous seasons and episodes on the Gotham Writers YouTube channel or on any major podcasting platform. And while you're there, like us, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps to spread the word. Regarding today, at any point in the show, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists. Most of you already know the layout to Zoom, but if this is your first time, you can post your questions right there with the Q&A button. It's on the bottom of the Zoom dashboard. It says Q&A. If you click that and post a question there, you can ask questions for the Q&A portion at the end of the show. There's also a chat button down there. That's just for general conversation among the attendees here. So make sure if you want questions answered, you put them in the Q&A. Now then, on to the conversation for today. Today we're talking with Inside Writing veteran Chuck Wendig. So Chuck is known for his blog, Terrible Minds, his Star Wars novel trilogy, Aftermath, and for numerous credits in the comics industry. He's also written and published novels, movies, games, and more. His most recent novel, The Book of Accidents, is available now, and his middle grade novel, Dust and Grimm, is coming this October. So let's welcome Chuck back to the show. Hello, Chuck. Chuck, you know, I got to say, it's actually hard to track your writing career because you've done so many things and you bounce between so many things in a very short time span, between different projects, different mediums. And it's essentially the point where I feel like you've written pretty much a little bit of everything. But where did it all start for you? What was that creative spark that sort of made you want to pursue this?
I mean, it was, it's super cliche, but it was when I was a kid. I think it was about 8th grade. And I was like, this moment when I was reading Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. And it was sort of about a character who's a kid who's, naturally a storyteller and how he later becomes a writer. And I just was one of those things where it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, this is like a job. It's not just a thing you can do because you like to do it, which is entirely not a problem. But I thought, wow, this could be a thing, because everyone's always like, what are you going to do when you grow up? And it's like, I don't know, astronaut. And everyone says astronaut, I'm going to be an astronaut. Even though I had no interest in going into space because that sounds terrifying. Once I sort of realized what that was, I was like, okay, I want to do that. So both from a creative angle of like, I really like books and reading and writing and all of that stuff and telling stories. I thought, well, this is a good time to start figuring out how I make that actually happen. And it took me many years. It didn't start in 8th grade, but that was the seed of it.
I think that's fascinating because I don't think a lot of, and I'm speaking in generalities here, but I don't think a lot of writers knew that early that this is something they'd want to commit their life to. I mean, how did you go about pursuing it? From like, what did you take steps right away to sort of secure this as your thing? Like, is that what you studied? Is that what you pursued the whole time?
Yeah, like even in high school, I took creative writing, but then I talked to the teacher and I was like, well, this is kind of what I want to do. And she was like, well, why don't you just take it every year? I was like, I don't think I'm allowed to do that. She's like, if we get approval, you can do anything. So I would take creative writing, and then my creative writing in like 11th and 12th grade was like, the class would be doing their thing, and I would be like, oh, Chuck is going off on independent study for creative writing. And I would wander the school like writing. It was like weird. Like I was just allowed to be like a rogue writing hobo, just like wandering the halls like a random, which you probably couldn't do now. You can't wander the halls now in schools, but I was allowed to.
That's a great foundational story for a writer. You're just wandering the halls writing. That's fantastic.
It is. It's very good. Yeah. He was an excellent teacher.
So what was your first breakthrough of writing? What was like we all have these moments where we think, okay, I can actually do this now. At what point did that register in your mind? Like, okay, this is something I'm good at.
I don't know if there was ever a point, even now, where I'm like, this is a thing I'm really good at. But I knew there was a point when it was a thing I could do. There was a short story that I submitted to a journal called Not One of Us. It was like a semi-pro kind of little zine, writing zine. And the editor, who, if I'm getting it wrong, I apologize to him, but I think it's John Benson. I haven't been in contact with this man in many, many years, but he responded back to my submission and was like, this is very close, and I am encouraged to see if we can work on it and then get it there. And I was 18, I think, at the time. And I was like, oh, okay. And at first you're just like, even now I experience it when you get like notes or like, this is close, but we need to work on it. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a beautiful, precious thing. And also it's so horrible. Why should anyone even work on it? It's so bad. So you like kind of vacillate somewhere between like, this is the Michelangelo and this is a work of art. This is Picasso. And like, this is, you know, come of the earth. This is algae. We can't even improve on this. It's just terrible. So, but then once you kind of get over that hump, I was like, we can work on it. Sure. And then I received the notes and I made some changes to the story and resubmitted, and it got in, and it was like, oh, so this is a thing that can work. And I had a few other, that year, actually, I had a few, like a local Charlotte, North Carolina journal published a story of mine. And it's just like a few things kind of worked together at the same time. And then none of them were what anyone would consider a big success. Just those little kind of hints of possibility made me think, well, maybe this is a thing.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, as far as when your actual writing career began, you began writing pen and paper RPG games. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. My first real, well, not my first real writing. First real writing job was with the International Cash Registers Dealers Association, which I don't recommend that be anyone's first writing job. Turns out they mostly just needed me to move boxes. So, but yeah, like the first kind of thing that I really wanted to do, the first thing that was kind of a creative writing experience was writing freelance for pen and paper role-playing games. That's correct.
And when did that, at what point did you, I mean, this is like a through line throughout your career. You're always attached to so many fascinating and, for lack of a better word, just cool projects. Like that sounds awesome. That sounds like something that people would want to do. And then you've got these other projects like Storium, Collapsus, Body, Mind, Change, and you've got Star Wars on there too. How do you find these opportunities, or do they find you?
They, to some degree, find me. I mean, the role-playing one was, I was gaming at the time. And again, it's that sort of, you realize, well, this thing that I'm doing, someone's getting paid for this. Like these words are not magically appearing in these books and in my hand. Like I'm giving money to someone and it's trickling down, ideally in very minuscule coins, as it turns out, to writers. So I'm like, oh, I want to do that. So I thought, well, if I'm going to continue to waste my life on silly games, then I should probably figure out a way to at least monetize it a little bit. And one of the games I played, the White Wolf game systems, they were looking for writers, and they had a writers all call. And because I knew they were kind of a sort of a, for lack of a better term, a pretentious organization, like I knew they were a little less like, you know, just dragons are awesome, man. But like they were a little like, what does all this stuff mean? Which is great. And I don't knock that. But I wrote a pretentious essay to try to get the work. And it turns out that worked. They fell for my ruse, and I ended up, I think, doing that for like 10 years. And all the other stuff just sort of lines up with weird opportunities. It's not so much they find you out of nowhere, but I always say there's so much in this career that's like you throw a rock in water and it creates all these ripples, and you kind of never really know when those ripples will hit a shoreline, and you don't know what will be waiting for them on that shoreline, but there's something there. Especially if there are other ripples kind of moving to cross into it. And so like working on a lot of the transmedia stuff or working on film and TV stuff was because I was stalled out on a novel, Blackbirds. And I, as a lark, tried and I entered a screenwriting competition. And it was never something I wanted to do before. And the prize was a mentorship for a year with a screenwriter named Steven Susko. And his whole modus operandi was adapting pre-existing material to the screen. So I was like, let's adapt my unfinished piece of crap novel to a screenplay, and then I can figure out an ending for it and readapt it to a novel. So I really had no interest at the time in writing screenplays, but it did open new opportunities, and I ended up with a writing partner in that space, and we landed at the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and then the year after we had a short film there. So just like stuff happens, you kind of throw rocks and see where they go.
I was going to say, it sounds like you are a good writer, and when you write good things happen. Like it makes it sound easier than it is, but that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and again, I'm not comfortable suggesting that I'm a good writer, but I definitely am a diligent and interested one, and I will try a lot of different things to see what works. I mean, a lot of what have happened is obviously very privileged, and I'm very lucky, but sometimes it's just that willingness of being kind of like, I'm going to just jump out of this plane and build a parachute on the way down.
Mm-hmm. And moving into more of the traditional publishing things you've done. So your first short story collection came out in 2011. It was called Irregular Creatures. Where were you as a writer in that book? Because I think one thing that, touching on short story collections in general, one thing that writers often struggle with is at what point, like, do you set out to write a short story collection, or do you just write a bunch of short stories that you realize all kind of have the same theme?
I had written a bunch. Some of them were successful in different ways. Some of them were just things I had sitting around. And I self-published it. It was not no one offered to publish that for me. And it was at the kind of the dawn of self-publishing. And I didn't know, I mean, not really the dawn of it in the truest sense, but in that rise of Amazon, like e-publishing with ebooks and so forth. So my career was in a weird space. I didn't know what was going to be, happening with my books or my novels. And I had an agent at that point, and Blackbirds was in her hands, and that was kind of surfing around, but not having any luck initially. So mostly it was just, again, that idea of like, well, I'm like an octopus here. I want to just stick as many sort of tentacles in whatever jars I can find and see what happens. I don't know what's going to occur and what's going to work and what won't. But if I don't try these things, then I'm not going to know. And until I know, then there's just no way to move forward. So I'd rather move forward than not.
So you were working on novels before your short story collection, and the novel just wasn't getting traction?
Well, I mean, even since I think my first novel I wrote was at 18, it was terrible. And then I wrote another, I wrote several that I never finished, but then I wrote another 4 that I did finish, and they were also very bad. Trunk novels in the truest sense, like they should be put in a trunk and buried in a deep ocean trench somewhere, unless they cause some kaiju event. I was always sort of trying that and not really doing it. And it really wasn't until Blackbirds that I found, and even then, Blackbirds took me 5 years to write as a novel because of that inability to finish it. And it wasn't really until I got the screenwriting mentorship that I figured out the book, which is a weird course of events. And I wrote the sequel, Mockingbird, in 30 days. So it just shows you the considerable jump of what happens when you learn some things about writing. But that was the time when it was like, okay, I kind of hit bottom with that story. And I knew and it was only later that I contextualized the idea that I was trying to write books based on either the market, my idea, the unknowable market, like, oh, the market wants this right now. I'm going to try to shoot these trends, which at that point, that by the time you've taken the shot, the duck is already gone. Or I'm going to try to write in the voice of writers I like. Let's sound a little bit like them. And both of those things weren't working. And so Blackbirds was almost kind of an exhortation of like anger. I was like, I'm fed up with doing all this stuff. That doesn't work. And I was like, well, I'm going to break some rules and I'm going to write this unlikable protagonist in present tense, third person. And she starts the story looking in a mirror. You're not supposed to do that. Well, I'm doing it. And it turns out that worked out. So
that's fascinating, though. That was the screenwriting that helped. How do you know what it was about going to the screenwriting that unblocked the roadblock that you were on with the novel?
Completely. Yeah, completely. I think even it was day one sitting down with Steven, and he was like, okay, I told him my plan, and I was like that I'm not really necessarily interested in being a screenwriter. Sorry. And he was like, well, you need to outline it. And I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that. That sounds terrible. Like that's what you people in Hollywood have to do. But we novelists, we we listen to the cows mooing in the distance, and what did the wasp say? And that's what we don't. We just follow our heart. And he's like, well, how's that going for you? It's like, oh, okay. I see it. I see okay. It's not working out for me. You're right. Good point. And he said, we're going to outline it just because they want that in Hollywood. And we want to do that, to learn the story. So I sat down for like 2 days, which like in retrospect was very easy, but it felt miserable to have to try to pull yourself out of the quote unquote art and the creativity and kind of isolate the story in these beats, but it was necessary for me to do so. And suddenly this thing I hadn't been able to finish in 5 years had an ending. It made sense. It was a story. It wasn't written in a novel yet, but the thing that had been blocked was suddenly unblocked. So, and I took that as part of my process. And the important thing there is, because I tell that story a lot, and what writers sometimes hear is, he's saying I need to outline. And what I'm saying is you need to change your process when your process is not working. My process was clearly not working, and that was the change that helped me work it.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you say you had an agent at that time ready. At what point? Because that's again
Probably
another
not
thing.
then, not at the screenwriting time, but once I finished the book, then that was the book that got me the agent.
And were you aware, like, what was it about that book that made you think this is the one? Whereas you acknowledged the other ones were trunk novels, ones you wouldn't bring out again. What made this one different?
It felt like me in a way that other books didn't. I did try to get an agent with a book prior to it, and the response was tepid. And I understood it. Like I wasn't really mad about it. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're probably right. That's a good point. But this one I felt, okay, there's something here. And it felt like this was a story I might want to read in addition to, it felt like a book that I had written. And so, I submitted it to a number of agents and put it out there and got good response sort of from a number of agents. So that felt good.
So since getting an agent is such a process that writers will struggle with, I want to explore that a little bit more. So when you sent out that first novel before this one that got you an agent, what did you learn from those? How many responses were you getting? What did you take away from those responses that made you realize this wasn't the right one?
The responses were of the type where they were really tepid. Like they were nice. A few weren't form letters. Most were. They were just kind of like, it's very nice, but it's not for me. Or like, it just needs more time, or this doesn't, whatever. It's just the kind of milk toast responses where you're like, okay. And then you sort of reread it and you're like, I get it. I was trying for something here, that I was reaching for a thing that wasn't very me, in the hopes that it would work. And it didn't work. So it didn't surprise me. That was the response.
And then you noticed a difference when you sent out this new one. You were getting better responses. And how long were you at that before you landed your agent?
Very quickly. I think within a couple of weeks, maybe I had gotten a response from my agent. And I was entertaining other agent responses at that time that were positive as well. One that kind of went sort of just weirdly sideways in ways I don't even understand. Like I sent it out to a number of agents, and one of them was like, oh, well, the agent, and he was a fairly big agent. She's like, oh, he's on vacation right now, but he's reading this book and loving it. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's cool. And then I would get these like periodic updates. Oh, he's on the lake today, and he's thinking it's great. He's halfway through the book, and he's so excited. And I was like, oh, this is really great. This is amazing. You're just like, oh, it's wonderful. And then I'm talking to who is now my current agent in the process, but I'm still getting these like messages, and then suddenly those stop. So like a few weeks go by, and I was like, okay, well, I think his vacation should be done. I feel like, unless he's just jet setting around the world. So I pinged them, and I was like, hey, what's up? Because I know he was really digging it, and I was getting all these sort of like daily updates from you, and then I was getting nothing. And she was just like, yeah, he doesn't like it. I was like, okay, that's cool. I mean, but I could have maybe used that heads up. Like, if you just should have told me that. And so my agent was the type who was like, I love this book, but I have a few suggestions. How would you like to hear those? And I was like, yeah, totally. And in some ways that was a test, because it's like, part of the test is your reaction to the test. Like, how do you react to the idea of having to make changes on a book? Like, are you going to be a prima donna about it? Like, what is and I was not. I was very excited to hear, she had been a crime editor herself. So it was like, the book was kind of a horror crime novel. So she made those suggestions, and I made those changes very quickly and got them back to her, I think, in like a day. And then she offered representation. And then I did what you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to go out to all the other agents who have the book and have not said no, or have expressed some positive possibilities, and say I have an offer, but you now have a week or whatever to also make an offer. And I was just like, I'm good now. Bye. I was just like, I have my agent. You're, two middle fingers. I'm out. It wasn't quite that dramatic, but and ultimately, at the end of the day, that was the right thing to do, as much as that's not the polite thing to do, because I knew the agent that I was talking to was the right one, and I think any other additional offers would have not been clarifying in any way. So I'm happy that I went with her and that it was a good fit.
So let me ask, how did you know that was the right agent? Like, because there is such thing as writers getting the wrong agent. Like, what was it that made you realize, oh, this is the right thing?
Communication was already at a good level. Not only did we communicate well, and she was clear and forthright, and I didn't feel like there was any confusion over what she wanted but she also liked the kinds of things that I wrote. there was no like, oh, can you do this different thing? Can you be a different writer than you are? Which of course was the struggle that I was having even before I figured out how to write books. So that would have been disheartening to have an agent who wanted me to be a different writer than I perhaps already was. And then just that sort of, it just felt like a click. Like there was something there that we were immediately talking, and I didn't feel any distance there. Like it was a good match. And I already knew some horror stories from writers whose agents were like, oh, I'm not like, they don't talk to them. Even now, like I hear people like, oh yeah, my agent doesn't really respond to my emails. I'm like, well, that's terrifying. I probably email my agent almost once a day. we talk random stuff or stuff about the business, and if I'm anxious about the business, I will, unfortunately, probably be like, help. And she's like, it's fine, calm down, we're good. So it's been an essential relationship. So to have the idea of that there's an agent who's like, I'm not talking to you right now, or like I'm not selling this book. Like this book that you wrote, I'm not going to even try. Freaks me out too, and I hear those stories all the time. So, yeah.
So from the point that you landed this agent to the point that this novel sold, what was that process like? Because it's not immediate. I mean, very rarely is it immediate. So what was your process like?
No, I mean, sometimes you get, a quick, it goes out in a month or two later, you have something, but this was, I think, a year and a half before it. And it went to all the big houses, and they were like, we got like the nicest rejection letters. They were like, we love this book. This book is great. And I was like, yay. And then they're like, we can't buy it. And it's like, what? Boo. What do you mean you can't buy it? And they would say, well, we love it, but we took it to sales and they're saying we can't deal with this. And I was like, and at the time I was still green enough to be like, well, what do I need to do to make it good? Like I will fix it in the ways that you think it's a sellable book. And then that's an option. And the editors would be like, no, we like it as it is. We don't want to change it at all. And it would be a no. So it was the weirdest sort of, like it felt good and bad at the same time. And so finally we found like at the end of that road, two smaller publishers in England who kind of both wanted it, and we sort of had to negotiate how that worked out.
And I assume I know the answer to this question already, but I want to hear. So during this whole process, when it's not selling, you're getting nervous, but I'm sure your relationship with your agent at that point was strong enough that she was telling you like, it's going to be okay. We're going to sell it.
Well, yeah. And also then like, what's the next thing? If this doesn't sell, then, we're still going to keep trying things. Like it's not, I think in the best kind of agent way, an agent represents the author, not one book by the author. I mean, I know technically they're really only offering book by book, but you want an agent who is looking out for you as a writer and sort of has a sense of what your career can look like, not should look like, but the many ways it could go and how you could keep going. Because, so much of this career is that like rodeo bull mentality, like you're just trying to stay on before you get knocked off. And so having someone who's with you on that and is happy to sort of cheer you on, holding on to the bull is a big win.
I'm curious, is the process still the same now? I imagine given your platform, it's easier to sell books now. Or do you still go through that same waiting to hear back process?
Yeah, we still go through the same waiting to hear back process. Never a year and a half now. It's usually pretty quick. And the good news is we have editors in general who are kind of, I'm not an unknown quantity. So generally speaking, they, have already been asking like, what's Chuck up to or whatever. I mean, that's how my, with Del Rey, my current editor, I knew she had already sort of poked around, and I knew she was theoretically interested and had once maybe almost offered on Blackbirds and didn't at the time, and was kind of regretting, or at least expressed a little regret that it didn't work out. So the ability to sort of have that there. And then, thankfully, like I'm able to sort of stay there just as I'm with an agent now. I mean, I'm sort of with an editor regularly, at least on the adult fiction side of things. And we have another 3-book deal. So I'm there for at least a little while. So,
yeah. And transitioning a bit out of the novel writing side of things. And we talked about this a bit the first time you were on the show, but I want to touch on it a bit here. So since you have, written in so many different mediums, how do you jump from one audience to another? Like we were talking before the show about how you have a middle grade coming out now, and that's you're writing for a completely different audience. Then how does that alter your writing process, or does it?
Well, it doesn't alter the process over much, because at the end of the day, you have to be reductive, but writing is writing, and you're going to sit down and you're going to do it or you're not. Obviously, there are different things that go into the mechanics of different genres or different age ranges or different formats. If you're outside of novels, comics and screenplays are a much different set of instructions and how you deal with that. But mammals all look different, but they all have similar bones. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, you're trying to find those common sort of story bones. You're trying to find a way to articulate a moving creature, even if it looks different than the last moving creature you built. And they all kind of work the same way, even if they're keyed in differently to different audiences and to different functions. So, mostly it's just learning all of that stuff and figuring out how to tell those stories and reach those audiences, but then also still cleaving to your own ways of telling a story and the things you want to say in a story I don't feel like they necessarily need to change. Who you are as an author is who you are. And you either have the desire and capacity to tell those stories to those different audiences or not. I mean, you look at like how screenwriters are not generally bound to certain genres. You could be a screenwriter and write a thriller here or a horror film there or a drama here. And that's okay. No one's like, well, but he's a horror screenwriter. I mean, sometimes if you do it for 10 films in a row, maybe you get a little bit branded that way. But I think it's easier to get branded as a one trick pony if you're a writer, especially if you're a writer who gets a novel writer, a prose stylist, especially if you find success early. Because that kind of that gets the brand on you and people start to expect to see a certain thing. And then the publishers expect to see a certain thing. And then you're in that trench.
So I'm pulling in a question from the Q&A a little early here, and you kind of answered this a little bit already, but I want to ask it again. So do you worry about maintaining your author brand when you're writing to different mediums, or do you just trust yourself enough as a writer to sort of tell the story the way you would tell it?
Yeah, I trust myself. I'm not a big proponent of brand for authors. I like to joke that brand is the thing you burn into the butt of a cow to make sure everyone knows who it belongs to. My feeling is I don't really ever want to be branded as one thing other than like me. Like I want to tell stories in the Chuck Wendig genre. Like I want to tell stories that feel like I wrote them, and that express the things that are bothering me or engaging me or terrifying me or things that I love. All of those things are what I want to put in whatever I'm telling, whatever story it is, science fiction, fantasy, young adult, comics, whatever. And so that's sort of the goal to me. Not to say you don't want to necessarily think about what that is for you. But to me, that's less about brand and more about voice. If you think about branding is something someone else I think should worry about. Like it's Coca-Cola has a brand and McDonald's has a brand. Those are things you think about when you think of those brands. They come with certain sort of corporate ideal things. And I don't, I think art and writing are squigglier and weirder than that. And it's more interesting to me to think about it as like, what kinds of things do I like to say? What are some of the things that are going to always go into the heart of my work? And even as I change and adapt that, I don't think you ever need to be married to one thing or the other, but that auteur theory, which is a little high-minded, is not entirely wrong if you let it be.
Mm. So let's shift gears a little bit again and talk about another medium that you're very proficient in writing in, which is blogging. One of the, you have this blog, Terrible Minds. It's been around for quite some time. What prompted you to start this in the first place?
Yeah, it's my October. My blog will be old enough to drink, so that's terrifying to me that's happening. I started it. It was like a straight up HTML static website. I would have to go in and edit the HTML to enter in a blog post, and I had no metrics on it. I didn't know. My roommate designed it. She did a great job designing this sort of blog for me, and I was mostly using it to kind of yell at me about me. Like it was just like sort of like I had frustrations about writing in the industry and myself in all of those things. And so I would just use it to bleat into the void. And then one day, a friend of mine in the game writing space, Will Hindmarch, was like, you should put this on like WordPress. Like you should get you should make it like a blog. And I was like, I don't know what that means. That sounds terrifying. So he sort of pointed me in the direction of how to do that and helped me do that. And it was weird because it was like because like suddenly I had metrics and analytics, and it was like turning on the light after you've been like sleeping for a while and finding you're in a room full of people, because there had always been people who were reading my blog, and I didn't really know that. Then it became kind of still me yelling at me about me, but other people were tuning in.
And I mean, it's pretty remarkable to keep a blog going for that long. Like, did you ever consider letting it go, or was this sort of like a release?
Yeah, I mean, I've considered letting it go, and certainly it's not as peppy now as it used to be. I used to try to blog every day, but there comes a point now, it's like I'm productive enough on the actual producing prose side of things that to blog every day is probably and having a family and stuff, like it can be like, sorry son, I cannot play with you today, daddy must blog, like it's not exactly churning in fresh coin, so I got to be careful and judicious about time. But I still do it, and I still make it a space if there's something. I actually would much prefer to just stay there instead of social media. Social media is a wonderful and terrifying place in equal measure, and you never quite know when it's a garbage compactor about to crush you.
No, I want to get back to social media, but I want to talk about just one more thing about your blog. Do you feel like it's helped you as a writer? Do you feel like it's helped you grow and develop?
Yes, because it's helped me sort of work through ideas, and then having comments, people who comment and talk to you. And because then, at a certain point, like while we have since sort of come to understand that comment sections in most articles are like the septic system. Like it's like, that's where the sewer clowns live. They're down there. I was always keen to be very firm on moderation on my blog. So the comment sections were usually pretty great. And so it was nice to have sort of people in those spaces talking to each other and talking to me, and just sort of working through ideas and them talking about their frustrations and struggles or their successes. And it became kind of a nice little, I hesitate to use the word community because I don't know that it was ever quite so formal as that, but it had that feel at times.
Mm-hmm. That's a question we often get is, as writers, should we have our own blog? Does it help you get ahead in things? So let me just ask, do you think writers should have a blog, or is it case by case?
Oh, yeah, no, probably not. I don't know that anyone right now that's like, should I have an 8-track player in my house? I don't know. Hopefully we all get back there, and hopefully blogs become the new vinyl, but you don't have to. Listen, I mean, and it's true with Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, because sometimes writers are like, now TikTok is how I sell books. And it's like, none of these things are how you sell books. I have very bad news for you. Social media is a very good place to engage with your community, not artificially build an audience. If I sold one book per every follower I had on social media, I would be an even more successful author than I am at this point. I'd be a bestseller every time. It just doesn't work that way. So you do it because you like it. That's the reason to do it. It's because it's either something you enjoy or it's something that's helping you. And I don't mean like in a crass use people as a ladder way, but if it's helping you engage with other writers and other or readers or comic artists or other creative people, however it is, it helps you in that regard, then definitely do it. The trick is to sort of not get bogged down by it, I think, and not let it be your main thing, because it's not really it's not going to work like you think it is, at least how I think publishers thought it was going to work back when it kind of first started.
Mm-hmm. So you have a very big social media presence. You're one of the, as far as authors go, you're one of the biggest followings out there. Why? Like, why? What is it about you and your social media presence that makes you such a presence on this?
I have no idea. I cannot imagine why. People probably should not follow me on. So as I watched that happen, I was just like, what is happening? Like, why are people following me? Like, and it was a mix of like talking about writing or just being funny or weird or whatever. It's weird because like back when, especially with Twitter and Facebook, but Twitter in particular, when it started, it felt kind of like the comment section under the blog. It felt a little bit water coolery. Like you're all kind of gathering around and mostly kind of talking about ideas or stuff with other writers or running bits with other writers, and not to be entertaining to anybody other than yourselves. But there came a point when that water cooler started to sort of like rise up, and then everyone went with it, and you realized you were all on a stage together instead of, and then sometimes the stage becomes an arena. Instead, you didn't know you were an arena, and you're like, everybody's fighting each other. You're like, I didn't know that either. I thought this was a water cooler, but then it was a stage, and then I thought it was a stage, but now it's an arena. So, you just kind of, and as your presence gets bigger and bigger, it gets weirder and weirder. And sometimes that's on me. Like, you're not always aware of, like, sometimes you just step on social media. Like, I have a controversial opinion about orange juice. And everyone's like, go to hell. Like, what? I didn't know. I didn't mean to. There's the orange juice people over here and the orange juice truthers over there and the apple juice people. And I didn't even know. I'm so sorry that I did that. I did not mean to be. I just mouthed off about orange juice. I'm so sorry. So, you try to be more careful about it. And, but that also cuts down some of the fun out too. Because you're like, I can't just go say things about orange juice now. Where do I go? Like back to the blog. Now you got to write like 2,000 words about the orange juice and explain your point.
Yeah, I've talked to 4 of my writer friends on the Twitter in the past month, and I feel kind of bad about it, but also kind of.
You should. Yeah,
I should. Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure. All right. So I want to talk about some like broader questions here. So, obviously self-doubt is something writers constantly struggle with. For you, especially at the stage you are now, how do you handle self-doubt? Do you still have it now? And what do you do about it?
I have it constantly. I just the piece of advice that I give to writers, and it's one of the pieces. There's not a lot of universal writing advice. There isn't, outside of like finish what you're writing, because I mean you got to do that sometimes. There's not a lot of like writing advice that applies to literally everybody. But one of the ones I think that has helped the most number of people, and it's certainly helped me, is that you need to care less. Which sounds terrible. It sounds like the opposite of what you should be doing. It feels like you should care more. If you love this thing that you're doing, you want to be a writer, how can you possibly care enough? But the problem is like if you think too hard about anything, and I mean, we're talking even autonomous functions. Like if you think too hard about breathing, you're going to be like, you just start to not even, if you just like go to bed tonight and think very hard about sleeping. Think about it. Really think about it. Like, am I doing this right? Should I be breathing this way? What's my heart doing right now? You're not going to be able to do it. And it completely short circuits your ability to perform even the simplest of tasks. When I started running, I'd be like, am I running right? And you'd be like, you kind of focus on like your gait. You'd be like, should my left foot go twice? No, of course not. I'll break my legs if I do that. But you just kind of get in your own head about it. And so with writing, we're very, very good at getting in our own heads. Because it's an intellectual and creative pursuit. So most of what we do is all up here until it goes down there. So, and by down there, I mean keyboard, not like toilet or anything like that. Though some of what I've written is definitely toilet. But, I experience self-doubt and I just don't care. Like I know it's normal. It's like an anxiety attack. When I experience an anxiety attack, I am aware of what it is. I've had them before. It's not new. And I know at the other end of it, I probably am going to be alive, like it, even though I don't feel that way. So it's kind of one of those, it's like, or turbulence on an airplane. You're like, this sucks. I don't like it. But I've been on every other flight. There's been turbulence and we've always come out the other side of this thing. And so I'm just going to assume it's a normal part of flight. And if you investigated it, of course it is. And so self-doubt is just like turbulence for your creative brain. And you're just going to be like, well, I'm going to ride this out. And in the meantime, we're just going to keep flying forward and staying up in the sky.
That's good advice. So I want to pull in the audience questions now, just to make sure we have some time for it. So first question, have you always worked as a writer or author? Did you also have side jobs, side hustles, full-time positions?
Yeah, I've worked periodically at different places with the International Cash Registers Dealers Association. If I didn't mention that cherry gig. I worked at the library, which was a wonderful, actually good job that I had. I was a systems technical manager for a necktie manufacturing merchandising company. So I have a closet full of neckties that I never have to wear. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I don't want to throw them away. They're very nice. Some of them are silk, for God's sakes. So I have donated many over the years, just to be very clear, but I continue to keep a few that I do like. Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of odd jobs and stuff. Some weird ones. Every writer has weird jobs. But for the most part, it's like I started doing freelancing when I was in my 20s. And even at 5 cents a word, I learned, well, if I can churn out 1,000 words in an hour, it means I'm earning roughly $50 an hour pre-tax. And of course, the tax on freelancers is gouging. But it's not the worst way to make some money. So I was sort of diligent in the pursuit of that freelance career early on. So the only time then I had to get a job after that in and out of work is when I was trying to get my first mortgage, because it was impossible to have anyone accept that you were like a real person in the world if you're just a freelancer. They just didn't understand it. They'd be like, who are you working for? I'm like, I'm working for myself. I'm a freelancer. Oh, right. Of course. I'm like, in your parlance, it's an independent contractor. They're like, of course, we'll write that down. They're like, but who's your boss? I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Still, I don't have that. They're like, well, can you send us pay stubs? I'm like, I don't have pay stubs because I'm an independent contractor. That is not how this works ever. And then they're like, we can't give you a mortgage. We denied. So I'm like, I'm going to get a job for a year and then reapply for a mortgage. And that did work out.
Gotcha. Next question. You have had success with an agent, but have also self-published. With self-publishing platforms becoming more prevalent, any advice or recommendations on which way to go?
I am not a great advisor on self-publishing. I did it well when it came to writing advice and not well when it came to fiction. I think you choose self-publishing because you are interested in being a publisher. And I don't mean being a writer who just gets to have their work out there, but I mean, you're very interested in how publishing works. You're interested in book design and marketing and what covers should look like. And you do research on, I mean, though, if you're going to take that seriously, just like writing, you should take writing seriously. But self-publishing is very much about being a publisher. It has nothing to do with being a writer. I mean, obviously it starts there. You have to have that. But too few, I think, sort of view it as like, well, I'm going to write it and then like press this button and it's going to just go to the internet and I will be a rich person. And it just doesn't quite work that way, especially now. We've left, by and large, Amazon is the only beast in the room when it comes to self-publishing. And while it's a great that there's a place to go for that, and it certainly creates an equity that was not there prior to it, at the same time, Amazon is just, they play shenanigans all the time with self-publishing, and there's really not a lot of other places to jump to. I actually found some more success setting up my own direct way to sell the books through like PayHip. And I know some people use like, what is it? Something Gumroad. And there's other versions of things that, or Patreon even, that deliver the work directly to people and they pay you. And actually, you know, the percentage is considerably better even there than it is in Amazon. But for me, my mileage is I like working with publishers. I am very happy to focus on the work and have them focus on how to make the work work. And if they're relying on you, then that's a sign that they're not doing their job because you're the writer, not also the marketer and the designer and everything else. If that's the case, then just self-publish.
Next question. To what extent do you feel being formulaic in terms of narrative structure is a must in order to make something more marketable or acceptable to the public's expectations?
That's a squirrely question. I don't think you have to be formulaic at all in most cases if you're really good. Any rule is breakable if you're good at it. I don't know. It's a terrible thing. I mean, you can do anything you want. In writing, you can do pretty much anything you want. Obviously, there are some story modes, though, that have a greater rigor to their structure. Romance, certain kinds of mysteries, even certain kinds of thrillers have a sort of an essential structure to them. I mean, even writing some comic books, you're structuring to a certain degree. Certain kinds of TV shows have a structure to them. So you certainly want to know those things, but that's not to say you can't do interesting things within those structures or those formulas. But also the good thing is a lot of the stuff that gets written doesn't have to adhere to those structures. And you're also free to leave that space and go do your own kind of thing. You just have to be prepared to be, practiced and good at that.
Next question. Ooh, this will be fun. How do you describe your voice as a prose writer? What makes Chuck Chuck?
I don't know. I just know it feels like me. I mean, I know there's some people who have identified certain sort of patterns in my writing or patterns in my storytelling, and I'm always sort of interested to see those things, both to make sure I'm not leaning on crutches too much, but also that that people, if they go to look for my writing, they see those things and are finding comfort and familiarity in those things, as opposed to something boring or overwrought. So I don't know. I really don't know. I just know that when I'm going to the page that I don't want to write like someone else.
I like that. Next question. Where do you start a novel? Do you jump around from scene to scene, chapter to chapter, or begin with Genesis and end with Revelations?
Yeah, I'm Genesis to Revelation. I am far too dull-witted and slow to do the jump around thing. I'll lose my mind. I've tried it and I'm like, no, I start at the beginning of the story and I go to the end of the story. And that, for my mileage, helps me understand the journey the reader is on as I'm taking it. Jumping around interrupts that pattern for me. I think a story is not one shape, but many, but I want to go on that ride with them and sort of at the very least be at the head of the roller coaster. So I'm experiencing the ups and downs and sideways loop-de-loops that they're going to go on too. Because if I don't have that, I think I can lose sense of pacing and I can lose sense of how we reveal mysteries or how you keep kind of turning the knife and changing the way the story and the stakes move. Because there's always a sense of with the story, as things get comfortable in a story, you approach a status quo. Storytelling is forever the act of upsetting the status quo. So you're constantly, it's the creation of tension, it's the creation of everything. You're constantly settling them in and then breaking everything again. So no one can ever really feel like they're on steady ground. So they're always forced to keep moving through the narrative. But if you don't necessarily, for me anyway, if I don't go on that trip and see how to settle in and then break it and then settle in and break it, how I can fill the room with oxygen and then set it all on fire again. If I don't follow those patterns and those beats myself, I lose it.
So to follow up with that, are you a planner or a pantser?
Well, starting with Blackbirds, I was a planner by necessity and a pantser by heart. So I would outline everything, every book, not always in ways that were meant for human consumption, but that were useful to me and not anyone else. Wanderers divested me of that particular piece of process. I don't know about permanently, but Wanderers is the book that taught me I don't know how to write books, which is great. And it's a really good thing to know because I learned that every time I enter a book, I'm a different writer when I enter it, and I'm a different writer when I leave it. And every book can only be tamed and tackled in its own very special way. And Wanderers did not need an outline, and I did not write an outline for Dustin Grimm or for Book of Accidents. I'll do it again if I have to. I'm certain I have a thriller kind of in mind, and I kind of want to outline it to view those beats. But yeah, it's a mix.
Next question. If you have a nearly finished manuscript, should you send it to agents or to editors? I guess also to answer that, at what point should you query?
I mean, I am obviously not an agent or an editor, but my understanding is never, ever do that. Always finish it and give it, time and a polish before you send it off to anyone. Do not just finish it and then immediately, kick it out the door. That's different if you have an editor, as in, if I'm on a deadline and I finish my first draft, I'm comfortable enough sending it to my editor as opposed to just being like, she's there for that purpose already. But if I had if I was trying to query a new editor or agent, I would try to produce the best thing I can. It's okay if it's not perfect. Everyone understands that, it's going to have to change. That's literally why agents and editors exist. It's because someone wants to take an imperfect but potentially awesome story and get it to that potentially awesome point. But you're talking about trying to get it to that B+ so they can carry it to the A. Not, I'm just going to give you my D- work and be like, we did it. And you didn't do anything. Do not burden people with material that is unfinished in some part.
Last question in the queue for now, at least, is do you need a platform in order to submit your writing?
Well, that's a depends kind of thing. Some editors I've spoken to have started to recognize that the nature of platform is a little bit fraught. First of all, it cleaves to privilege, and it cleaves often to away from marginalized voices. So, loud, cisgendered straight white guys are going to have a stronger platform because they're just out there kind of able to be noisy about stuff, and that's not necessarily advantageous to anything other than the platform on which they're on. And it doesn't sell books. We often think, well, this is going to sell books. It doesn't sell books. It really, you might move I don't mean it doesn't sell individual books. It does. You can sell 10, maybe 100 copies of a book. But to move what a publisher wants, which is arguably thousands of copies, you need a publisher invested in advertising and marketing and selling to distribution channels, and you need a publisher to do those things for you, and not to just rely on an author and their quote unquote platform or quote unquote brand. That being said, there are some publishers who still want to know that you are able to engage on social media, and that I don't necessarily think that means numbers, having the quote unquote following, but it does mean that you have a demonstrable social media that is not like some troll account. You're like, well, here I go. I just yell at people all day, and that's probably not going to be a good fit for you. And I know with nonfiction writers, a platform takes on a different purpose. Your platform is less about, in fact, this is sort of the original function of platform. Your platform was not how many followers do I have on Instagram, but rather like, am I published in the space that I'm going to write this nonfiction book on? Do I have connections in industries or speaking gigs that allow me to be an authority on the book that I'm writing, and not just like, hey, I'm just some jabroni who wants to write a book about medieval warfare or something, and you're like, that's not going to work out because you don't have the cred for that. So platform is sort of a fraught issue in that way.
Two more questions came in. What is some advice that you would give authors going on submission? So they have an agent, their stuff's going out there. What's your advice to them?
Stop paying attention to it and start writing the next thing. That's it. Like, that's all you can do. It's now out of your hands. Like, so much of this, the most you can control in this career is the thing you're writing. And then once you push that thing you're writing to the agent, the editor, or they push it out to an audience, it's kind of ceases to be yours. And there's only so much you can do. You've raised the baby to the age of 10, and now it's like someone else has it. And that's weird and hard to deal with. So it's time to make the next baby. It's a weird metaphor, but I think people will follow it if it's purely figurative.
Definitely. And last question again for now, what do you enjoy most about being a writer?
I like all of it. I don't, I think it's, I'm ruined for public life. I could not, if I had to go get a job right now, I don't know how that would work. Be like, you're supposed to wear pants here at the office. It's like, oh, okay. I don't know if I'd like that. I'm very fortunate. I get to sit in this box and tell stories, and that's a pretty great place to be. I love all of it.
So last question, just parting advice, people who want to either pursue a career as being a creative, or somebody who just wants to write in multiple mediums like you have and write to so many different audiences, what would be one piece of advice you'd give them?
I don't know. It's really hard because there's no universal advice. There's just nothing that works across everybody. And so, there's only a few pieces that are kind of true. And one is like iterate a lot. I mean, at least from my mileage, trying to do it a lot is very useful, because there are certainly writers who sit down and have never written a thing before, and then they churn out a glorious literary tour de force that cannot be denied. But that's not most of us. Most of us, if you're going to sit in front of the piano, you're going to have to take some lessons first. And so you're not going to be, Chopin the moment you settle your butt into that chair. So it's just kind of like doing it and trying a lot of different things, and not being afraid to experiment, and not getting your expectations in any one direction, and not turning off your brain, and kind of just hard charging forward. I often say that like a publishing career and trying to write anything is like putting a bucket on your head and headbutting a wall, and either you're going to fall down or the wall's going to fall down. And sometimes you just gotta start headbutting the wall and hope for the best, and be more stubborn than the bricks in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Alad, I want to slip one more question, and that's just that. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
No, this is good. You nailed it. Yeah, it was easy. Yeah.
Good for me. All right. So to all of our listeners, this has been, welcome back to Inside Writing. This is our first episode of the season, and we'll be back next week with Eric Smith, literary agent and young adult author. He's great. Yes. Chuck, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. And to all of our listeners, we will see you next time.
Thanks all.